So I will just welcome us all to this virtual employer roundtable. This is our third roundtable and the first of 2025. I just want to kick off by saying welcome to everyone. If you're new to the Cyber Guild or the virtual employer roundtable, please check us out on our website. This specific roundtable and some others in the first quarter of this year are in direct support of some work we're doing with Virginia Tech, and Ariana is on this roundtable, so she'll butt in at some point during the course of the next few minutes or 45 minutes or so for a reverse job career fair that's running on March 19th in Blacksburg, Virginia. But we'll highlight that again at the end. So to begin with, can I welcome our esteemed guests and thank you so much, Alan and Chris, for your time. We have Chris Delahunty, who'll say a little bit more about himself in a moment, but or Chris Moschella, sorry, he'll say a little bit more about himself in a moment. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's Keiter or Keiter, the company name.
Keiter, yeah, you had it right.
Keiter, thank you. I always say if you give an Irish person more than 2 vowels in a word, you just get what you're given. Yeah, Chris is joining us, your Senior Manager for Risk Advisory Services at Keiter. Chris can give a little bit more fabric to this, but they provide audits, IT, internal controls, and cybersecurity. But also, if I'm not mistaken, Chris, you also do pen testing, simulating phishing scenarios to help cybersecurity hygiene and awareness programs. So Chris will join this great conversation with a good friend of the Guild, Alan Delahunty, who also, like me, has a Texas accent from Ireland. So Alan has been around the horn with cybersecurity and the insurance and financial markets now for some time, over 15 or 16 years. Alan is the Vice President within McGriff Insurance. Are you still part of Truist, Alan?
We're not.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore.
Okay, well, that's a bit of it. You can fill us in on that in the intro, but Alan provides insurance to the commercial sector. Also, you're involved in M&A. I know that you have experience in M&A transactions in the past too, both within the US and internationally. So I'd love to hand it over to Chris and Alan. You can say a little bit more about anything that I've missed and kick us off. Welcome, everyone.
Alan, why don't you go first?
Yeah, good afternoon. Alan Delahunty, McGriff Insurance. Originally from Waterford, Ireland. Came over many years ago, played soccer in college. Been in insurance 17, 18 years, and yeah, appreciate Debbie's invite and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for having me as well. Like Debbie said, I'm a senior manager at Keiter, and we our team here specifically works a lot with IT and internal controls and cybersecurity, doing all the things that Debbie had mentioned. We work a lot with organizations that need SOC audits, SOC 1 and SOC 2 audits as well. Recently, there's been a big regulation coming out of the Department of Defense that's impacting thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses called the CMMC, and we're helping organizations get ready for that cyber regulation. So Alan, I had some questions for you.
I got some for you.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first question for you. How are your clients dealing with cyber insurance?
Well, cyber insurance is getting better. So it's been a tough few years for companies dealing with cyber insurance, but it's getting better. A few reasons for that is there's been more capacity in the marketplace with insurance companies. Companies be given better terms. There's better controls in most companies. For good reason. Cyber has become pretty much everybody's job, not just IT. You know, for many years, it was just the IT department that was your cyber division. Now it's everybody at the company. So there's more tasks, more awareness. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Companies, you know, are diligent and have to remain diligent. So there's a lot going on in the cyberspace. Companies are spending a lot of time on that on a daily basis. There's constant training companies are doing. They have to keep employees aware, you know, frequent updates. Unfortunately, there's a cost with that. You know, companies have to pay money to be proactive, and obviously nobody wants to have a bad day, but preventing that bad day costs money. and there's a lot of time and indirect costs associated with companies doing that. So there's a lot going on to fight off attacks, to remain safe, and yeah, it's forever evolving.
And how has cyber insurance, changed and evolved over the past, over the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, a few years ago, insurance companies were given policies and didn't really ask many questions. The past couple, 3, 4, 5 years, there's been a lot of claims. There's more data. There's a lot more questions, a lot of scrutiny. So it's definitely evolved on the cyber insurance side, where companies are, asking more questions. The cyber insurance renewal used to be pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's become a lot more complicated. Most companies nowadays have a certain level of cyber insurance and cyber measures that they have in place, and they continue to evaluate levels, limits, retentions. CMMC, like you said, Chris, is obviously a big thing that's come up. So it's evolved. It's basically put more time on the company to be more diligent and more proactive, unfortunately, on the company side. And again, the reason for that is because a lot more claims, a lot more data. So I got one for you because you're asking all the questions. So, what do you think are most important concepts for businesses to understand when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, cybersecurity is a, technical field, but I think there are some, high level concepts that, business leaders and, most folks in an organization should try to understand and appreciate, I think, and it would be helpful. First, there's no such thing as perfect security, and there's no single security tool or procedure that can adequately protect an entire business. Cybersecurity, I think a better term for it is cyber risk reduction. And it's really just any business or organization's intentional efforts to try to reduce the risk of a cyber attack or, any other type of negative technology event like a hardware failure or a lost device. So, those efforts to reduce that risk are usually, they take form by layering on different types of security that often have overlapping areas of concern. The phrase 2 is 1 and 1 is none comes to mind. For example, most organizations have network firewalls and antivirus systems on their endpoints. But most people won't say that, we don't need an antivirus because we have a firewall, even though they both can protect against malware. Those two things seem to be kind of, sacrosanct. But I do hear things and sentiments that go something like, well, why do we need to block macro-enabled Excel files in our email if we have an antivirus? Shouldn't the antivirus be able to detect it? Yes, it should, but it doesn't always, which I think is the point, right? And so it's better to think about these types of things in terms of, how does a particular defensive measure fit into your overall security and reduce your overall risk? And, thinking about it in terms of risk also gives you the benefit of avoiding the cyber equivalent of putting 5 deadbolts on the front door while the window's open. So that's, I think, one concept. Another concept, I think, especially for business leaders to understand, is that not always, but often, improvements in security come at the cost of a degradation in the user's experience. A perfect example is multi-factor authentication. And I think we probably all know what that is, but just to be sure, right, that's when you log into a system, and in addition to your user ID and password, you get, a text message or something else that requires you to provide a third form to verify your identity. And it's a pain in the butt. And whenever this is rolled out in an organization for the first time, it always generates complaints. And business leaders really need to get behind the IT team and defend them when the complaints will eventually come in. Now, as with everything, there's a balance, and we're not all going to just go back to pen and paper, and we're not going to get rid of email. But the point of this concept, I guess, is that simply for the fact that a particular defensive measure impairs user experience should not automatically disqualify it from consideration. I think it's also important to note that no business is too small or obscure to be attacked. A lot of small businesses think that they're going to somehow fly under the radar, and that's definitely not the case. Certainly the biggest entities are going to be subject to the largest number of the most sophisticated attacks, but they can also target small businesses, right? Because small businesses also have less sophisticated defenses, which can make them an easier target. And sometimes the sophisticated actors can use a smaller business as an entryway into a larger business. A really famous example of that was the Target data breach from a decade ago or so. And if you recall, in that case, the attackers ended up stealing data from like 70 million customers, credit cards, debit cards, other personal information. And the attackers ended up getting in after stealing credentials from an HVAC vendor through a phishing campaign. So, no business, I think, is too small to be targeted. And Alan, maybe when I'm get through this next point, I'd love your thoughts on this. But in that case, I don't even know if the insurance would have been able to save them, because the HVAC vendor didn't have a $500 million policy to protect them from the breach. Target didn't even have a $500 million policy. So anyway, we'll come back to that in a second. But I think another key concept is that complexity is the enemy of security. And I think organizations today, we have a tendency to constantly bring on new tech, the shiny new thing that's going to help solve whatever our problem is. And I think it's worth recognizing that the fact that whenever we bring in a new system into an environment, it can interact in that environment in unpredictable ways. So like, let's take a very simple example. Let's say a company decides to add a shared drive to their corporate network where users can share files back and forth with each other. You're not going to be able to predict how the users are going to use that file share, what type of data structures are going to emerge, what they're going to put there. So the point is that anytime you add something, you're adding a certain layer of uncontrollable unpredictability. And again, I'm not suggesting that because of that, we shun all technology and become Luddites and go back to pen and paper, but only that what is often exuberance, I think, over whatever the new thing is, the new tool is that we're getting to help make our lives easier, that should be tempered a little bit with a recognition that, what are we bringing into the environment? What could go wrong? And then last, a quick one. There's a famous thought leader in the cybersecurity space named Bruce Schneier, and one of his many quotes goes something like, "Cyber attacks only get better, they never get worse." In other words, the bad guys are only getting better at what they do. They continuously find new and clever ways to get around our security measures and to manipulate people to accomplish their goals through phishing and social engineering campaigns. So we can never really be in a state of, oh, our security is good enough. As soon as we get to where we think we need to be with security, it's time to start thinking about, okay, where can we tighten things up a bit and make things even harder for the bad guys? So, Alan, was there an insurance policy that HVAC vendor could have had?
So I was going to respond to that. So thinking about good question. So when you think about an MSP, it actually came up last week in a meeting where managed service providers and contract is king, right? Meaning that when you're signing a contract, make sure you've got good legal counsel to consult in with that. So when you sign something for a hold harmless indemnification provisions, I'm not an attorney, don't want to be, never will be, not smart enough, but get good guidance, get good expertise before something bad happens. Because again, MSPs, et cetera, has multiple companies they work with. And again, what's enough insurance? The reality is, if there's a bad day, there's probably not going to be enough insurance. So how can you be made whole? So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, no,
so,
it's perfect.
I mean, you can only buy so much insurance, as you know, right? So.
So Alan, I know you keep your ear to the ground on the data and the claims. So what are some of the recent lessons you've learned with recent claims? And what type of trends are you seeing in terms of the cyber insurance data? Because I know you get a ton of data.
Yeah, a couple of things recently. It's kind of interesting. We always talk about the human error aspect is never going to go away, right? The human element. We've been saying that for years, and it's just not. No matter how many procedures or proactive measures we have, it's just not. So, example recently, a few weeks ago, had a company email comes in. It's 4:10 p.m. on a Thursday. Hey, pay this invoice. CEO emails the controller, right? Um, the controller was busy doing their job, gets another email 4:50. Hey, this needs to get paid by 5, or we're not going to get this, product tomorrow. Okay. So sense of urgency, red flag, right? Under pressure, red flag. The constant follow-up. The CEO has never reached out more than twice in a week on anything. So two times within an hour is a lot. But again, that controller was very busy. They're slammed and they were trying to do the right thing. Long story short, sends it out. It's an impersonator. It's sends it to a person that's not the CEO. Thankfully, they had insurance for that. I will say one thing they learned from that is having fraud controls through the bank. I know banks talk about that a lot, and oftentimes, there's a cost associated with that, as we all know. But some of those controls been put in place could help with that as well. So that's one thing that happened recently. And we see that a lot. Obviously, we get the phishing, and Chris, you're and do some testing, right? That's something we see a lot of, and people fall for that stuff all the time. So they've gotten better with the MFAs, the multi-factor. That's helped with some of the business email compromise. But again, the human error part just is not going to go away. Had another incident where there was a breach. Someone got in healthcare group, 4,000 emails were affected. The forensics on that was astronomical, to figure out what happened. So that was 90% of the claim. You got the notification of records, the monitoring, the investigation. That was a very large claim as well. Again, human error, right? Clicking on something we shouldn't have. And unfortunately, that was a bad day. Insurance obviously covers certain things on that, but the indirect costs with CFO, CIO, HR, general counsel, you don't get back those indirect costs, right, with that. So it's, a lot going on in that space. We could talk about this for days, but those are just a couple of examples.
And anything else in terms of data, trends, that type of thing?
Yeah, there's, again, like I said, the business email compromise is a big one. People are getting smarter. It's AI has become a hot topic. That's everybody's watching out with AI. That's kind of, coming into play here. They have more data. Insurance companies have gotten smarter because they've gotten a lot of claims, throughout the years, and they've priced accordingly for that. So yeah, a lot going on.
All right.
And there's some questions coming into the chat as well, if you have the opportunity. I see that Liz and our questions were very similar, which is, speaking to the layperson or not necessarily lay people, but even small business to medium-sized business, why would they care about cyber? It goes back to your point about there's a rising attacks on small business. And in fact, some small businesses think they're too small to be a target. So are there any companies that you would say should worry less or not worry at all about cyber strategy focus insurance? Or is it really anybody and everybody? How, can you give any insights into that?
On the security side, I would say it's a extremely narrow profile that would define the type of business that would have no cybersecurity concerns. Do you use a computer? Do you take payment? Is it everything in cash? It's I think it's more of a question of how much and where. And I think the source of the question is good because it's a challenge that businesses face, which is everywhere you turn, somebody's trying to sell you a cybersecurity product, and every vendor is saying, "Oh, this is the one that's going to solve all your problems," and you don't know. So I think a good first step is just to think about whatever your cyber risk is. Ask yourself questions about what type of data you get, where it goes, how it's protected. And once you get a sense of the risk, then you can get a sense of where you would want to apply any type of cyber protections.
Yeah, it's same on the insurance side. I mean, it's everybody. Obviously, a medical group versus a government contractor versus a manufacturer, different risk profile. But I mean, everybody's exposed. Years ago, obviously, USB and a computer was, if you're losing that, that was data back then. It's evolved, like Chris said. Everything is virtual now and online. Everybody's exposed.
So if everybody's exposed, then is there any advice you can give us, given your range of experience from, small mom and pop shops through to international corporations? I mean, not everyone's built equally, like you said, Chris. It's kind of, you cut your cloth based on what you need. But is there any tip, advice, or what would the calculus be that you would suggest to someone to understand, do they really need cyber insurance, and what do they look for as the minimum they can get away with? Because this is not cheap, especially when you're trying to, keep the doors open.
Yeah, I mean, on insurance side, I mean, controls are really important. From a limit perspective, a standard policy on insurance would be $1 million in coverage all the way up. Social engineering would be typically capped at 250 grand. Again, some carriers can give more. 250 is kind of the cap, depending on the industry. But I'd say controls is the big thing, and Chris could speak more to that. But the proactive measures are critical.
Yeah, on the cyber control side, I mean, there's too many to potentially list, and honestly, it depends on the business. Alan mentioned it earlier, and I mentioned it as well, as multi-factor authentication on anything that can be accessed remotely. That's a huge first step, because so many of these attacks happen with a user making a mistake and giving up their password to an attacker. And unless that attacker can also somehow get around the multi-factor, which is possible but extremely difficult, then you're doing yourself a big favor by implementing just that. But yeah, there's a laundry list of potential things that could be added. And too much for a webinar for sure. I mean, give me 8 hours and I'll rant here for you.
Is that free consulting for cyber people?
It is from Chris.
But is there and I'm not knocking insurance providers here, Alan, but it seems like trying to make an insurance claim on the house or the car, it's all about how to stop you being successful in your claim. In cyber insurance, is there typical small print whereby if you don't do at least some basic hygiene, then it's pretty much impossible to pursue a claim, like multi-factor authentication and stuff like that? Does that sort of thing apply in cyber insurance?
Yeah, so I think years ago, the answer is you buy insurance to pay claims, right? So when someone fills out an application, there's multiple questions on there. It's usually a 4, 6, 8-page application where they want ransomware supplemental application, so they know the risk profile. And if you're not doing MFA, you're going to have a really, really, really hard time finding insurance to begin with. So no, when you buy a policy, I mean, it's there to cover certain claims. Obviously, every policy is different and what coverages they have and sublimits, but if there's subjectivities on there, our clients know that beforehand before we bind. So, if you have insurance, it should cover what you think it should, if you have good advice. So
yeah, and Debbie, I'll just add to what I said earlier, is that there's an almost unlimited amount of resources online regarding cybersecurity, including guides for small businesses. I think the Small Business Administration has some recommendations there. There's more information about cybersecurity than one can consume in a lifetime. So if somebody's looking where to get started, I would just start searching for small business cyber protections and see what comes back. But yeah, there's definitely plenty of guidance out there for small businesses and how to get started.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me send one to you, Chris. So tell me about ransomware. What is it and how big of a problem is on your end? What do you see?
Ransomware is a big problem. It's the most prominent type of cyber attack we see today because it's so profitable to all the attackers. And in case anybody doesn't know what it is, right, it's a type of cyber attack in which the hacker finds a way to execute some type of malicious code that encrypts files on a computer, and then it tries to spread itself across your networks. And while the files are encrypted, they're unusable, right? You can't use the file while it's encrypted, and to make it usable again, you need to get an extremely long decryption key, which the ransomware attackers have, and they charge you money for the key and the tool to bring the files back to a usable state. And there's a constant game of tug of war between people on the defense side and the criminals. And on the defense side, companies have gotten better at recovering from ransomware attacks because they have good backups, and they're getting better at restoring from those backups. So what has happened? The ransomware attackers amped up their game, and now they frequently layer on different types of threats and extortion. Most notably, they now will often steal the data as they're encrypting it. And that way, even if you have backups and you can recover, they're going to say, we're going to release all this information on the dark web if you don't pay the ransom anyway. So you might have heard that called double extortion. And recently as well, there's other forms of extortion that they're layering on top of it in the form of denial of service attacks on business technology, companies' websites, basically making their website unavailable, and other forms of harassing individuals in a business to try to coerce them into paying the ransom to the attackers. And it affects businesses of all sizes, just like I mentioned earlier. No business is too small to be immune. The big businesses make the news. Colonial Pipeline was probably a famous one that everybody recognizes. But a number of years ago, Hard Times Cafe, which is a small restaurant in the DC area that I used to go to all the time, they had to shut down one of their restaurants for a couple of weeks when they got ransomware. And that's a big deal to the wait staff there who didn't get paid during that time, because you can't get tips if the restaurant is closed. So in terms of preventing it, there's no silver bullet. But ransomware, it can get in as a malicious email attachment or a file download, or can just be executed manually by an attacker who's gained access through any other traditional type of means. So, in most respects, good ransomware defense is just good cyber defense. But in terms of, a framework for thinking about it, I usually think about it in terms of prevention, containment, and response. And there's a lot in those three words, but just at a high level, right? You want to prevent it from getting in, obviously, but if it does get in, what you don't want it to do is to spread all across your network, where it can take down an entire business. Because it's a bad day if you get ransomware on a single computer, but it's an absolute disaster if it spreads to your network, corrupts your backups, takes down your phone lines, which is what happened to Ortho Virginia a few years back. And that one's in the news, if anyone wants to look that one up. And from a response perspective, Alan, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. What I always recommend clients is that they have an incident response plan and practice it. And that one of the most critical things to have an incident response plan is to identify the incident markers that would trigger calling your insurance carrier. I've had an alarming number of clients that have incident response plans, have cyber insurance, but there's no connection between the two. So not every incident needs you to call your cyber insurance carrier. Now, if somebody's Microsoft Excel is acting up, right, does not warrant calling Alan or your your carrier. But there's a lot more there to ransomware that we could talk about. But yeah, Alan, I don't know if you had anything to add on the response and what the insurance carrier's role is in responding.
Being proactive is important, right? We talked about proactive because, having the right legal counsel. We keep saying legal counsel because it's unfortunately when a bad day happens, you don't want to be on your own and on an island, right? So if you have an insurance policy, obviously the first party data breach, they have approved panels they work with, and then you have non-panel providers. So the time to ask those questions is before something happens. And to your point, Chris, talk to the experts, get the advice, have stuff in place. So when something bad happens, which hopefully never happens, if it does, then you're ready to respond and you're not down for X amount of time. So
right, and the insurance isn't just a monetary response, right? If there's a ransomware attack, right, they can often marshal other services to your aid, people who are experts in ransomware and communicating with the attackers, and forensics people that you had mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah, it's critical. That's what you're going to be dealing with. Yeah, so again, to your point, yeah, be proactive, get advice from the experts, listen and implement. Again, we see people have bad days, unfortunately, and they don't have, after the fact, they said, we wish we did this.
Right.
Which is also, nobody wins in that case, and it's a bad day. So it makes a bad day worse.
Right. You had mentioned earlier cybersecurity controls and the process that the underwriters go through to evaluate the risk of the covered entities, the policyholder. What type of controls are the underwriters looking for to be implemented within the organizations that they're covering?
Yeah, that's a good question. MFA is a big thing. We talk about that. I feel like we beat that to death, but that's kind of the base. Endpoint detection comes up. I'll just kind of tell you a few that they ask about. On a renewal, they're going to look for a cyber renewal application. A ransomware supplement application is standard. Operational technology supplemental, make them into play if applicable. Depending on the operations, they may require a biometric data application, wrongful collection supplemental, pixel web tracking questions. Again, depending on the type of risk, they're going to ask a lot of questions. If it's a more complex, bigger company with more unique needs, oftentimes an application can obviously give yes, no answers and some more information. We like to get on a call with the underwriter. So, insurer, potential insured, company buying the policy, underwriter, us, get on a call and talk through it, because we see a lot of times when companies, might buy companies or doing acquisitions, they may bring on 4, 5, 6 different entities, and they have different setups, right? And that could be that could be very complicated, and it is very complicated. And how do you get it all in one place? And oftentimes that's really hard to do. So a 4-page application is not going to tell an underwriter that story, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of the some of the things they look for. I did print off a couple of days ago, Travelers, which is a Corvus is a Travelers company. They have the 5 emerging cyber claims trends for 25. I just want to let you know what they are. So 1 is the rise of class action filings. 2, navigating the regulatory landscape. 3 is the evolution of data privacy litigation. 4 is the persistence of social engineering and ransomware. And 5 is the business interruption challenge. So those are kind of their core 5. The business interruption one, standard policy will have a business interruption coverage, and then also a dependent interruption coverage as well. So think about the health change incident that happened recently where companies were affected by that. You know, the policy could respond to the dependent business interruption with that as well. So they're asking a lot of these questions because, again, there's a lot of exposure. And getting back to contract, I keep saying contract because I've been on a lot of calls with attorneys where, you know, not all contracts are created equal. And again, being proactive is important. These underwriters are asking lots of questions to answer your question, Chris, and it's not getting any better, unfortunately.
All right. Are there any more questions for the audience, or Alan, did you have any more for me?
There's just a couple of questions, and maybe you'll get to them if you just feature them in your plan, around talent. Questions around, make sure I say it right. Basically, what kind of cyber positions are the most accepting of entry-level talent? Certainly financial services, insurance companies are seen as a route into cyber as a sector. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about that would be great. And there was an earlier question, but I can't find it, but that's there somewhere too. So I'll go and find the other question as well.
Yeah, I mean, on the insurance side, there's, I mean, a huge need. And I think every industry and people I've talked to, there's a massive need for cyber experts and people in that space. They're crying out for people, and you know, I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. There's a massive need for cyber experts.
What's any thought or experience from you and Chris around, you know, what type of skill profile or what type of person do you think that's coming into the field of cybersecurity would see insurance compliance as a route in terms of transferable skills or qualifications? Any insights into that?
It's a good question. You know, that's not an area I tend to give a lot of thought to, because I'm always just elbow deep in the you know, the detail of the work. Let me think about that over the next 10 minutes, and I'll see if I can come up with something.
Yeah.
Alan, I don't know if you had anything on the insurance side, like how would young people looking to enter the cyber insurance world, how would they look to get in?
Yeah, that's a good question too. One I haven't thought about. I mean, on the insurance company side, you know, they're always looking for talent, right? So talent meaning underwriters and people that are underwriting policies, and they're constantly bringing on people out of college, and they're crying out for people not only fresh out of college but also experienced underwriters. So that's not going to go away as these companies continue to evolve and, you know, underwrite more cyber policies. The insurance companies are very hungry for more cyber insurance, so that means they need more people to do the work, underwrite those. So that's a big need on our side. On the broker side, I mean, always looking for not just cyber people but talent in insurance in general, and people who want to get into this industry. It's, you know, almost crying out for talent, and I would say that for pretty much all industries, to be honest.
Yeah, and now that I've thought about the question, Debbie, I think on the cyber side, to kind of echo what Alan said, there's only going to be more demand, and I think a big source of the new demand for cyber professionals will be on the compliance side, right? There's going to be, and there are emerging now major cyber compliance requirements that are going to take a lot of effort for organizations to comply with. You know, think about like all the efforts an organization has to do to structure their accounting to comply with tax rules and generally accepted accounting principles. a lot of that same stuff is going to be happening in the cyber world. And, you know, we see that with, well, we've seen it with HIPAA, we've seen it with PCI. You know, those were fairly narrow industries, but we're going to start to see it expand more and more. CMMC is that regulation that's impacting Department of Defense contractors and subcontractors. So it's going to be, you know, somewhere on the order of 200,000 businesses, and will eventually be rolled out to everyone who interacts with the federal government, which is even larger.
Mhm.
And that requires a lot of work as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, if I was younger and I was going back to a college, I'd love to be in cyber. You know, there's a massive need in that space. It's just, there really is.
We have a lot of people who are entering cybersecurity, or and those that are transitioning from other careers, you know, and it's a case of thinking about life skills and transferable skills and experiences. And I keep saying it's as much about mindset and aptitude as it is about being techie. Which is why I think the insurance and banking industry, if you think about, you know, online payments and things like that, that does seem to be a route of interest in terms of entry level, where you don't have to be a coder. But if you have the aptitude and a background in anything that could be related to policy, compliance, business generally, shared services in terms of IT, finance, or business shared services, I think there must be transferable experiences. And if there are openings in CPA and insurance companies, then it would potentially be something to look at as a way in. Hence the question, really.
Yeah, tremendous need
Mhm.
for talent.
So you might have other things, but whilst Chris and Alan are riffing off each other, please weigh in with any other questions.
Yeah, I had one here for Chris came up. Will we be ever rid of hackers?
Will we ever be rid of them? No, not in our lifetimes anyway. I'd be willing to bet, and you know, I think for a few reasons. You know, new software is being written every day, and you know, software engineering is really hard, and software developers have to be experts in, you know, multiple programming languages, you know, a dozen or more APIs, experts in optimizing their application code for performance, networking, cloud architecture, and usually a dozen or so tools that are in their development stack. They usually also have to be an expert in whatever the code base is at the company that they're working for, and at least have some domain expertise in the, you know, the subject of the application is that they're building, accounting or whatever it is. So then you add all that, that the code has to be secure, and that product development managers always want more features, faster, better, and cheaper, and then you have a recipe for there to be forever vulnerabilities in software that'll be exploited. You know, I think AI will help somewhat in that regard, but it's not going to be able to detect all these things and prevent all these things, especially when it comes to complex systems and how they interact with each other.
So that's a no.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of, you know, on the technical side, you know, just one element of the technical side. But like you said, right, attacks also target people, and you know, most people who are using computers for work do not understand the implementation details of what makes them work or what makes the internet work. And you know, who can blame them, right? Because it's a wildly complex technological world, and asking everyone to be a security expert is completely unrealistic. And although security awareness training can help, you know, any business is always going to have, you know, some highly sophisticated attacks that could fool even their most savvy users. They could have low sophistication attacks that will catch the most savvy users on a bad day. And then there's always going to be a portion of the users who will never learn the basics of being, you know, cyber street smart. so that there's the human component. And then last, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was talking with a colleague here about it. And cybersecurity itself is just hard. And when you think about it, when you compare it to security at like a bar or a club, where you might have a couple of bouncers that are there during the busy times, like a Friday night or a Saturday night, and they have to be prepared to handle a few unruly drunks who are usually not even as strong as the bouncers are. And if things get out of hand, usually other people at the bar, other patrons will help, get the ne'er-do-wells out of the restaurant. And if things get really out of hand, they can call the cops, right? Now, imagine if instead of a few unruly drunks, SEAL Team 6 decides to descend on the local bar and cause trouble, right? The bouncers are going to be totally outclassed. And what if SEAL Team 6 decided to drop in at noon when there were no bouncers, right? There would be absolutely zero resistance. And I think this is really the reality and the challenge of cybersecurity. We need to be prepared for the low sophistication attacks, the equivalent of the unruly drunks, but also advanced persistent attacks. And we have to be perfect 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have to be good enough all the time, and the bad guys only need to be good enough once. So I don't think we're ever going to be rid of hackers, and I think those are just a few reasons why.
It is, and that's why small businesses, their life is more difficult, right? It makes it more difficult. You got to spend more time on it, and you can't ignore it, unfortunately. And if you do, it's something bad's going to happen, unfortunately.
Thank you. Have we got any final questions before we close?
I got one last one for Alan, if there's no more.
Go for it. Hopefully it'll be a better note than the end is nigh.
Yeah. Well, Alan, in your role, you do more than just sell people insurance, right? You also try to help support businesses. What are some of the things that you do to support and educate the policyholders and the folks that you work with?
Yeah, I think sitting down, having a conversation, just like we're doing here, and talking through what their concerns are, where they're going the next 12 months. Someone who has a policy, for example, a client, talk about where they're going the next 12 months, what they're doing currently proactively, what the expectation is for the insurance renewals, what the carriers are doing, just having a conversation, and, not just do that once a year, but on a continual basis, specifically on the cyber side, but then all different lines of coverage as well. And honestly, just been proactive and just educating them on, what we're seeing with clients and, what their peers, for example, a government contractor, someone else might have been affected by some, here's where they were hit. Obviously not give any names, none of that information, but just keep educating, updating, doing seminars, just continue to be proactive. I mean, sure, same on your end, Chris, right? I mean, just having those, consultative, high level conversations. And, if a bad day does happen, which we hope it does, and if it does, we're there to help, and they know exactly where to go and what to do. That's the best day, best case scenario.
Thank you. Any final words from you, Chris?
You don't want to just ask me for final words. I'll keep everyone here till 5 p.m. I don't think so. Most of my work is working with companies in most, not all, but often in a compliance capacity, where I'm helping them to identify what they're doing to meet certain requirements. And, part of it is, make sure that you're doing what you need to do to prove that you're being compliant to whoever is going to be looking to see if you're compliant. But at the same time, right, when we're talking with organizations, it's always an opportunity to say, this one is more than just a paperwork exercise. This is really a good thing to do if, you can do X, right? So, it's always, I think, a balance, thinking about how big a company is, where they are in their security maturation process, and trying to make meaningful recommendations that would be, cost effective for them to, mitigate a reasonable amount of risk given, where they are in their cyber journey. So, I think as with everything, it's about balance and finding out what makes sense for a particular organization, and trying to think about their cyber in terms of their overall risk profile, and not trying to just band-aid individual things because they read an article about it in the news, right? Taking a step back and looking at the full risk of an organization is always a good place to start.
Before we finish, I've just shared in the chat the link for information to the job fair, a reverse job fair, and hopefully, are you seeing my screen here? If there's any the information, so that link that I put in the chat will take you through to the website. If you're interested in building a sustainable cybersecurity ecosystem through encouraging more diverse talent and thinking, then please check out this job fair on March 19th. There's a lot more information through the link on the website that I've just sent. We encourage you to sign up and to come. We'll also be planning an employer fireside chat over lunch, so it's worth coming for the meetup and the lunch alone. We'll have some Cyber Guild leaders there sharing insights for 2025. So just Ariana, I invite you. Is there anything you want to say in closing remarks? Ariana is the power behind the reverse job fair from Virginia Tech, and nice to see you there, Ariana.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you. Yes, yeah, thanks for the time. Just give me a minute or two and I can give you an overview. So I'm the Senior Associate Director of the Integrated Security Center at Virginia Tech. So that means I do research, workforce development, all sorts of things. I want to push out this job fair to you all because this is a cost-effective way to meet talent that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. And so this project is all about how do we think about cybersecurity? So even in this conversation, we've asked the question, what does early career compliance and cyber insurance look like? It's a great question. So we're trying to answer that. So what we do is we help employers write skills-based job descriptions. Yes, you might want a 4-year degree, but why? What are these candidates? What are they able to do? How are they hireable to you so that you can mold them? Because entry level means that you have to teach them about your business, right? So they might know some technical stuff from their degrees or whatever, but you need people who know your business. And that's what this sort of talent pool offers. We have right at the beginning of their careers, cybersecurity is an exciting path. It's fantastically important right now. And that's what we're doing. So on the employer side, we're looking for anyone. We can help you write your job descriptions. You might already have job descriptions. You might just want to come up and see what this is all about. Our event is March 19th. It is a physical location in Blacksburg. And we do have a VIP lunch that Debbie touched upon. If you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me. It's a really exciting project. And what we're really trying to think about, as this conversation has hopefully given you some idea of, is that when we think about security and trade-offs and what are actually quite mature skill sets, like security is all about cost, benefit, what is risk? Well, what does that look like on the front end? What does that look like for your early career talent? So we're trying to answer these questions. I would love to see you in Blacksburg. Thank you so much, Chris, Alan, for your discussion. It's sparking hundreds of ideas all at the same time. Yeah, thanks for your time, everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Debbie.
So thank you to Alan and Chris for getting us started in 2025. Much appreciated. Just a heads up, we put our February session live this morning. So you will join us in February for a conversation with ISC Squared, who did some research through 2024 on why women are leaving cybersecurity. So we learned nearly 40% of women left cybersecurity between 2019 and 2023. We really need to understand why and what we can do to change the story. So Dwan Jones will give a sneak preview. You'll see it here with the Cyber Guild first before it's published. So join us in the February session, and that is now live on Eventbrite. So thank you once again to Chris and Alan. Much appreciated your support, and thank you all for joining. See you at a Guild event soon. Bye.